It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the final session of our conference this afternoon, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Peter Honey.
Actually, I have to make a small correction. I didn't start life as an occupational psychologist. No, it didn't occur to me until I was about 21. I've had a very good day. By the way, a definition for me of a good day is that nobody has expressed astonishment that I'm still alive. Though Jack came close to it, talking about all those years we've known each other and all the things we've done together and so on. Everything in my life happened a long time ago. And the odd thing, of course, about being last is, well, by the way, congratulations, so many people are still here. You stayed the course, you didn't slope off at tea time. But the difficult thing about going last is that just about every other speaker through the day, I've been ticking off the things that I was going to say that have already been said rather better than I was planning to say them. So there isn't very much left. But nevertheless, undaunted, I've got a few things that I would like to do, all on this theme of, well, how on earth can we make learning at work, of which more, of course, in a moment inevitably, how can we make learning at work the priority that it deserves to be? And I've got, if you count them, they're in your pack, of course. By the way, I counted up all the slides this morning, rather wickedly, before we began. There are 229 in the pack, not all mine, I've only got 12, but there are 229, plus all the extra ones which people have suddenly produced that weren't in the pack. We must have had today in excess, I reckon, of 300 PowerPoints. So I've got 12 to go. There are 5 which are going to be totally introductory, going to set the scene, and then 7. That doesn't come to 12, does it? Never mind. And then 7 which are 2 5s are 10, 11, it does come to 12. Of course, and that's not counting this one, by the way. Well, thank goodness for that. Right, well, but this we can do very quickly because, honestly, this has all been said, and you know it all already, but it's just worth, I think, spending a second saying that learning is even more important than it always has been, for all these reasons, and you know, etc. I think I should have the word etc, because there are many more reasons than these, but these are big reasons. For example, if I just take one, the last one on my list, more responsibility. We've heard today from a couple of speakers about choice. The world's becoming more complicated. We have a plethora of choices. With choices go responsibilities. So what's happening, of course, is that a lot of people suffer from choice overload. I suffer from that very easily, where you're just faced with too many fine discriminations, too many choices, and so on. And with choices go responsibilities. So as people's responsibilities go up, then, of course, learning becomes more important, not least to suffer the perils of choice overload. So learning, at the bottom there, little strapline, is the key, and I'm sure we all believe this already, to our effectiveness, and not just to effectiveness, but to our fulfillment, to us leading fulfilled, worthwhile lives. Now, one of many interesting things about learning is we use the same word to describe the process of learning and the outcomes, the outputs. And I'm just going to say 2 things now, first about process and then about outputs. I'm actually more interested myself in the processes, but it's silly to say that because the only reason you'd be interested in a process, of course, is to maximize the probability of getting to a good outcome. So it's silly, really, to say that processes are more important than outcomes. In fact, probably we'd have to say, wouldn't we, that outcomes are even more important than processes. But we have to have good processes to get to good outcomes. And the problem, I think, with the process of learning is that, for understandable reasons, the outcomes of learning are far more noticeable. You can touch them, you can feel them, you can count them and measure them and all those sorts of things, whereas the processes are slightly mysterious things which are going on inside people's heads and so on. But what I would say about the process of learning, three key things, my argument, hopelessly biased as I am, is that this is the core capability, or if you prefer to talk about competences, the core competency. Simply because learning is the overarching competency. Everything else that's important, and every capability and competency on all these lists are important, of course, but every other one is reached, of course, through the learning process. So in that sense, learning, it seems to me, is the overarching capability, more important than anything else on anybody's list, and that's not to deny the importance of all the other things on these lists. Second thing which occurs to me about learning for human beings particularly, is I can't imagine, can you, a time when it will ever be declared obsolete. Surely, I mean, the things we have to learn differ, of course, because of change and all the rest of it. But the idea that human beings will ever be able to say, right, been there, done that, don't need to learn anymore, you know, let's do something else, is, I think, unimaginable. Certainly, there are many things in my life that I've learnt which have become obsolete or are going to become obsolete. So I can understand the things we need to learn may well become obsolete as events overtake us, but the learning process itself it goes on endlessly and presumably always will. And finally, but I've already more or less said this, that it does seem to me that the processes are, well, let's say they're as important as the outcomes, even though, as I've just admitted, outcomes, of course, in the end are what we're all interested in, the results of the process. But more about the process in a minute, because I'm going to come back to that. Now, if we talk about outcomes as opposed to the process for a second, and you say to me, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about then when you're talking about creating learning environments and so on? What exactly are you on about? And my definition of effective learning, because notice, and again I'm going to repeat myself in a second, notice how learning, if you just let it rip, could be bad learning. It's just as easy to learn the bad things as it is to learn the good things. In fact, you could argue, for some strange reason, it's actually easier to acquire bad habits than to acquire good ones, for some reason, which I've never quite fathomed. So notice that learning left to rip, left to its own devices, left unchecked, could be unhelpful, inappropriate, all sorts of bad for you, all sorts of things. So, of course, we're not interested in that. We're interested in effective learning. What's effective learning? Well, I say three things. One is it sticks for as long as it has to, which obviously isn't forever, because events overtake us and all the rest of it. Secondly, it gets used, and I have to add, feebly, I think, appropriately, because, of course, it could be used inappropriately, so unfortunately we have to put appropriately, rather apologetically in brackets. And finally, when it's used appropriately, it makes a difference, and we have to put for the better, because difference, of course, can go in any direction. And the last one, in a way, is the feeblest, because I'd settle for managers being role models, being providers of opportunities, and building learning into the system. I'll settle for that. But actually, I've got one extra one. I also would love managers to actually blow the learning trumpet. I want them to champion the importance of learning. I want them to radiate enthusiasm about it. I want them to have examples of how it's been of benefit, of how it's benefited the bottom line and all these other things. I want them to persuade colleagues, reluctant colleagues, so that they also can understand that it's an important part of their job to create a learning environment and so on. Etc. You know, all my lists should have the word etc. because they're not exhaustive. I've not been watching the time, and we've gone over, haven't we? Aren't we supposed to go home now? Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for staying the course. And now this is what you've got to do with your managers. You've got to get them to do these 4 things and create more learning-friendly workplaces. Thank you very much, Jack. I apologise for overrunning.